Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It is 4 p.m. ET, and you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. And we are so pleased that you are here today and so glad that you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 14 going on 15 novels of suspense. I need to tell you, just parenthetically, thank you, because the trade paperback of The House Guest, which just came out, just went into a second printing. So that's great. And that's because of you. Thank you, Anise. And welcome to all of you. And thank you to all of you who bought that book. No pressure. It's just my career. And that makes a huge difference. My new book, One Wrong Word, comes out in February. And we'll talk about that at some point. But that's not why we're here today. Today, we are here to talk with Anise Vance about his really compelling, riveting, amazing Hush Harbor. And I cannot wait for him to tell you all about that. It's a debut, which is amazing. Came out last week from Hanover Square Press. Let me just read you one quick. The reviews are awesome. The reviews are just throughout amazing. But here's a starred review from Library Journal. So just let me read you this. Here's Renee and Deborah. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And Sharon. I'm so glad that you're all here. That the crime timers are lining up now, and I'm always so thrilled to see that. Thank you. So let me tell you this. Library Journal starred review says of Hush Harbor, this is the book we're talking about today, throughout, there's a sense of edgy anticipation, and not just because of the content. Readers will also understand that they are encountering an exciting new voice in literature. So, Anise, you read this review, and it says you're an exciting new voice in literature. What did you think about that?
It's hard to express. And that review I think was also written by somebody who I had met, Barbara Hoffert, at the American Libraries Association conference, and was just the most lovely, genuine person, and has such a long history with libraries, with novels, with literature in general. And so for her to say something like that just was a dream come true. That's the kind of validation that in your wildest fantasies you kind of think about, and you're like, oh, wouldn't it be great if this ever happened? Sort of like being on the show here with you, Hank, by the way.
Yeah.
This is unbelievable. I watched your Brendan Slocum episode, and I was, and as I was watching that, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be on the same show that Brendan Slocum was on. And I'm going to be with Hank Phillippi Ryan. And I was just like, this is insane. So thank you so much for having me here. It is just such a joy.
My pleasure. And you see me blushing like crazy. Brendan is amazing. I always loved talking with him, and he's quite a genius. But this is your debut novel, and everybody only gets one debut novel, no matter what wonderful new voice you are in literature. This is the one. What did you think when you first saw, when someone said yes, or when you first saw the cover, or when the first review came out, or when you saw it in a bookstore or an airport? What are you thinking now?
I've been trying to parse through these different emotions, as you can imagine. And you feel joy, and you feel excitement, you feel all of those things. One thing that I did not anticipate feeling was just this sense of relief, because you don't really believe that it's ever going to happen, as much as you're writing towards it, as much as you're wishing for it. And then, you get your agent and your publisher, and you know theoretically that at some point you'll walk into a bookstore and your book will be there and your name will be on the cover. But then you actually see it happen, and you kind of just freeze. And it's this surreal moment where you're like, I actually don't think my book should be on the same shelf with Zadie Smith, but this is a thing that is now happening. And so that's been just mind blowing, honestly.
Well, it's great. And, it does prove that we as authors are so needy about things and so uncertain about things. And it's such a joy when someone says, yes, you're good. This is right. This gorgeous book that you've worked on for years worked. It worked. What you hoped would happen has happened. Let me quickly say, before we get back to Anise in a minute, welcome, welcome, welcome to A Mighty Blaze. If this is your first time, we are so thrilled you are here. If you are a veteran on The Mighty Blaze, we welcome you as well. I see Kathy Lanigan and Vickery Gregory saying congratulations. Renee is here and Brenda is here. Priya, this is marvelous. Everybody is coming today. If you don't know about Prime Time on A Mighty Blaze was started. Can you hear the construction guy outside is beeping like crazy? forgive me about that. That if I go out right now and yell at that guy for beeping and backing up in my backyard, it would not be happy. He would not be happy, and I would miss you. So anyway, I will persevere. Primetime was started 3 years ago or so at the beginning of the pandemic by the genius powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us reading and keep us discovering new authors and keep us discovering new books and to keep your TBR piles just growing and growing and growing. And we know that will happen today with Hush Harbor. And one of you lucky readers will win your very own copy of Hush Harbor by leaving a comment or leaving a question or just leaving general applause and delight for Anise in the comments. And we will pick a winner at the end. You will not get this book. I am keeping this one, but you will get your own copy of Hush Harbor. One more thing, let me tell you quickly, formally about Anise, so you know who we're talking to today. Anise Vance is a writer from the African and Iranian diasporas. He holds an MFA in creative writing from Rutgers University, Camden. As a Mitchell Scholar, he received an MPhil in geography from Queen's University, Belfast. He is a graduate of Dartmouth College and currently lives in North Carolina with his wife and 2 children. So Hush Harbor. Now I'm going to stop talking and let you talk. Hush Harbor. Can you just set up the story and tell us what it's about? And then we'll talk about what it's really about as well. Yeah. So first, just tell us about the plot, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
It's 2030, right? Where are we and what's going on?
Yeah. We're in a fictional city called Bliss, New Jersey. And that city looks a lot like, if you think about a much smaller Philadelphia, looks a lot like that. And in that city, there's been a police shooting of a Black teenager who was unarmed. In response to that shooting, a resistance group has emerged. And so it's gone beyond protest, it's gone beyond movement. This is a full-scale armed resistance group that has emerged in Bliss. And that group has housed itself in an abandoned project, an abandoned housing project, and is calling itself Hush Harbor. It's calling itself Hush Harbor after the places that enslaved persons would go to pray and worship in their own traditions and languages. So these folks who have started this revolution are reaching towards sort of this higher set of ideals when they've named their revolution Hush Harbor. So the novel starts with Malik, who is a new recruit. And so you're seeing the movement, you're seeing this revolution through his eyes and trying to understand what it is he's seeing and what it is he's understanding. And he has this journey where he grows from being in a position of relative naivete to being very close to the leaders of the revolution. The second person that you meet and whose POV you inhabit is named Quinn. And she's actually outside of the revolution. She's working in the Bliss city government very closely with the mayor. She's a white woman who has deep, deep sympathies with the revolution and is now struggling with her notions of allyship, especially as the Bliss city government and white supremacists are starting to put more pressure on this armed resistance group to try to dismantle it. The third and fourth POVs that you meet are Jeremiah and Nova Prince, and they're a brother and sister who are deeply intellectual, deeply ethical, and also in some ways a little bit stubborn. And because that, they start to butt heads, not on values, but on how to enact those values in the world. And so you start to see sort of the central conflict of the book in terms of, what does justice mean? How do we sacrifice for the people we love? What does it mean to show up in a very real and genuine way for not only the people, but the ideas that you really believe in? And so we go on that journey with Jeremiah and Nova as they're having to make very difficult decisions in a very pressure-packed environment.
Just in the smallest of levels, the name Jeremiah and Nova are so carefully chosen. Talk a little bit about why you did that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Excuse me. Sorry, my phone just rang and I had to turn that off.
I told you it's Hollywood, right? It's totally Hollywood who's calling you, and I don't blame them because this is the most cinematic thing ever. Good for you. Anyway, back to the
hilarious. Yes, so the names are very, very carefully chosen. Jeremiah and Nova, so they're names that are intended to hearken both to the past and into the future. They're names, Jeremiah especially, that have biblical roots. And they are names that sort of are common enough, right? You meet enough Jeremiahs and you meet enough Novas that you can imagine sort of this person, but are also mythical enough such that you can imagine that person in this sort of revolutionary capacity. and you can imagine this person envisioning a different kind of a future for the country. And so the names, when I finally, and it took a long time, but when I finally kind of came to those names, the characters really started to solidify, and I started to understand them a lot better and was able to inhabit them a lot better.
I mean, just like the story, which is gripping and riveting and a page turner, and as I said, just as cinematic as anything could possibly be, and exciting and terrifying. It's multi-layered, just like the names are multi-layered. I mean, you bring out from the beginning, first of all, this is 2030. This is like day after tomorrow in time. It's such a cautionary tale about what might really happen. Did it feel risky to you or powerful to you to set it in such a near future?
Both. I mean, you hit it on the nail. It felt both risky and powerful. In writing, I always want to write towards the things that in some ways scare me. And so possibilities like Hush Harbor in some ways are deeply frightening. And it's deeply frightening that something like that might happen sooner rather than later. In other ways, it's deeply hopeful. And so that combination, that walking that line between fear and excitement and fear and hope, is sometimes a line that we pull back from a little bit. But for me in this novel, I really wanted to walk right into that and inhabit that space that many of us, I think, feel internally, especially when we see headlines on police shootings, especially when we see headlines that have to do with racial tension in the United States and racial violence in the United States. But walking into that space felt like the most needed and the most productive and the most urgent thing for me to do. And so setting it close to where we are right now also felt really real. And I started writing the book in earnestness in 2014 and had the idea for it in 2011. So I didn't even imagine the events of the last 4 or 5 years, which have made this whole world seem all the closer to kind of where we are.
That's so interesting. I didn't even think about that because it's so timely and so relevant and so relatable. And then I kind of forgot how long it takes to write a book and how it must have been a while ago that you started writing this. It's so relatable, this edge between activism and revolution. I mean, that is a big step. How angry and unhappy and bereft and does someone have to be to take that next step? That's a big step. Talk a little bit about that and the way your characters deal with that.
Yeah. It's so interesting, right? Because each of their characters has their own very particular motivation for being there. And you find those motivations when you're in their POVs. At the same time, there was something really interesting that happened when I started sending the book out to agents, where a lot of agents had responded to me saying, hey, we really like the book, but we think you need to have a stronger motivation for your first character, Malik. And I noticed that a lot of those agents who were saying that to me were not Black agents. And I went back to my initial readers who are all Black folks, my sister, my wife, my cousin, my best friend. And I was like, I'm getting this feedback. What do you think of this? And all of them were like, oh, that never even crossed our mind. Of course Malik would go to this thing. Of course I feel that instinct that if this were to ever happen, I might want to go to that thing. And so you had this really interesting moment. By the way, the agent that I'm with right now was not one of those agents who gave that piece of feedback. Mm-hmm. I just want to note that the agent I have right now did not give that piece of feedback. But it was just this really interesting moment where I started to understand a little bit that maybe some of the feelings, the really strong, intense anger and frustration and grief that I was feeling and that my family members and close friends were feeling maybe wasn't shared by a lot of other folks who had the same political viewpoints. But
yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I think that people think they have it. They feel the same grief and frustration, but what they don't have is the history.
Yeah.
And there's no way, I don't know a way to get that. And you express that so gorgeously in Hush Harbor. It is so illuminating. I mean, even the beginning of the book, it is, this move toward the revolution and actually getting into it, which is not easy to do. Talk a little bit about that first step-by-step decision-making, power balance theme of when they go in.
Oh God, Hank, I love this question. This is one of the reasons I think you're just such a good interviewer, because you ask these just perfect craft questions. The entry point of this novel felt like everything, right? Because you can write a novel like this with almost the exact same sequence of events, but if you don't enter it right, people will immediately think that you are either um, re-traumatizing people, or that you are trying to capitalize on
Yes.
racial situations, or that you're telling some standard race war story, or something like this. And so that entry point that is very deliberately cloistered in a way, that is this kind of, hey, we have this character who does not know much and who is now in this really intense moment of just entering this revolution, allowed me to kind of build the world in a way that was slow enough, and build the beats in a way that was slow enough, that I think my readers are going to come with me, right? And they're gonna think to themselves, oh, this is just a really good story as we're hitting the different beats, and they'll encounter the complexity that gets us beyond the stereotypical narrative and stereotypes around characters in this situation that we sometimes have.
Yes, that is so beautifully said, because it's the complexity of it as you draw us into this really good story, and we kind of think we know what we're reading, and then you sneak in philosophy and religion and faith and justice and truth and power and conflict, and I mean big justice. And by that time, we're totally into it. Did you plan it that way, or did the story just bloom as you were writing it and become truer as you were writing
I think it was more the latter,
it?
that the story just bloomed and became truer and truer and truer. And I'm a slow writer, Hank. I wish I could write as like at an excellent level very quickly, like you do in your career, on your 11th, 12th, 14th, book. But I'm a relatively slow writer. It takes a long time for me to kind of get the pieces of the puzzle together. There was, though, the intention, and I talk about this as sort of looking for the moments of poetry in a novel, right? Because most of your novels, if you write a whole novel in poetry, readers aren't going to go 300 pages of that. It doesn't have enough of a it doesn't it might feel like constant fireworks, if you will, right? But if you pace it, and you're able to drop in a moment here and a drop in a moment there, and then all of a sudden you have these, like, these momentary flashes that happen in a novel that can, I think, really warm a reader and really give them the sustenance that they would need, and that you want to provide for the story.
And it becomes part of the character development as well. It becomes part of our understanding of the character. There's so much in this novel about the conflict of the greater good versus personal good, the idea of one's own power, whether and revenge and redemption, and whether those kinds of feelings are, whether you're empowered by that, by those things, or whether you're trapped by those things, which can go either way. It can be a prison of your own making, either way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I find that, I wonder if you find that too, Hank, in your own life. I find that in my own life. Every time that I open myself up to a new reality and a new sort of set of injustices in the world, I have this feeling of both being incredibly empowered and wanting to do something about this, also not knowing what to do, and then also in some ways trapped by my own emotional state around
Yes.
it, right? And so conveying that sort of sense, that it's like shaking up a soda bottle, right?
Yes.
You feel totally shaken up, and you're like, oh, should I pop this or not, or should I let it sit? And, so there's all those questions that start to emerge for these characters as they're super 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 trapped, and the shaking doesn't stop. And that's the big part about living, I think, both in the real world and in Hush Harbor, is that as we are open to the world, we realize that the shaking doesn't stop. It's not like we have a day off of bad news. We can look for the good news, but the bad news is coming. It's not like we have a day off. The storms are coming. And so how do we live inside of that shaking is a question that these characters are really trying to grapple with.
And there's such a sense of inside outside in this novel, the concentric rings of how we live and who has the power, and whether the nucleus of the power, the small nucleus of the power, whether that can actually explode, excuse the expression, but just sort of metaphorically right now, into something else. I mean, you see in Hush Harbor the schools and the food and the way that the system works, and how it's all a system in itself that has a power structure as well. Talk a little bit about that and the poetry involved in that as well, as people realize where they are and what they've sort of signed up to do.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. One is that it's a lot more romantic to walk into a bullseye than it is to stay inside the bullseye. And the characters start to feel that, right? Malik feels that, and then your other characters start to feel that, and it really becomes a tension point. And you can imagine people going crazy inside of a situation in which they're just trapped in this one place, devoted to this one mission. And so I wanted to capture a lot of that. I also wanted to capture what it would actually mean to build that society. What does that look like? Because if you're trying to build that, you have to have food. You have to have some form of education for children. You have to have some form of sanitation. You have to have these very basic things that we take for granted. But now your revolutionary leaders are having to think about this whole society. What does commerce mean in a society like that if people want to trade things? So they're thinking about this whole society and how do you embed principles of justice within those various facets, right? And so very quickly, the idea of, okay, we're just going to start a new utopia becomes a challenging logistical.
Because we know, your smart readers know that utopias haven't worked. I mean, they just, because power emerges and human nature emerges, and selfishness emerges. I mean, Crime Read says, let me get this right, Hush Harbor is an epic novel of utopian hope in a dystopian world. And I talk a little bit about that utopian. Hope is such a power in this book.
Yeah. I mean, so all of the characters are coming in with this sense of we can do something, right? And we can rebuild something. And they are highly, highly idealistic and highly utopian. And those are frankly characteristics that I hope that I carry with me, that I hope that many people carry with them, because without that hope, it would just feel so difficult to trudge through the everydayness of every day. But in pursuing that, they run up against, to what you were saying earlier, Hank, they run up against some of the exact challenges that we see in society today. How do you use power? What's acceptable? What are the boundaries of that power? Who gets to make the decisions and when? How do you distribute decision making? So all of those kinds of questions are things that must necessarily emerge in a utopia, and how you respond to those helps to define the kind of society that you're in. And so Jeremiah and Nova, and then eventually to an extent Malik, are really kind of at the forefront of that decision making.
And in a situation like Hush Harbor, over all of it is this goal of this common goal that the people who have risked their lives to be there are involved in. And even then, I mean, there's such a powerful scene, one of the many powerful scenes in this book, a discussion between two characters, I won't give anything away, about the difference between being a teacher and being a general. And the decision-making process of, even if you believe in something, even if you believe that taking a certain action is the right thing to do, what about if you have to be the one to do it? And how different that is.
Oh God. It's a world of difference. It's a world of difference. And these characters through the novel are on this sort of path of self-discovery in a sense, right? And I think that to me is one of the things that differentiates sometimes a really good novel from a really excellent novel. Not that I'm putting Hush Harbor in the excellent category.
I am. Go ahead.
Oh, but your characters alongside the plot are going on this journey of profound self-discovery. And what's important is that they are in some ways surprised by that, right? Because if they're not surprised by it, the reader's not going to be surprised by it. And so each of these characters starts in a very different place than they end up. and each of them surprise themselves by the change that happens, or the change they thought that would happen but didn't. And so hopefully what the readers get by the end of this book is a sense of transformation, right? And some of those transformations maybe readers won't love so much. Some of those transformations maybe they will, but the characters themselves will have stayed true to that journey and that movement.
Because how a character is revealed in a novel is all about what decisions they have to make. And you as an author are carefully offering people higher and higher and higher stakes for what decisions they have to make. I mean, readers need to know that this is a page-turning, thrilling, terrifying, exciting, as I keep saying, cinematic novel, which you will envision and not be able to put down. Hush Harbor itself is just, I can picture it right now. But the decisions, how you raise the stakes and raise the stakes and raise the stakes, and finally it is, how far would you go to get justice?
Yeah, exactly. You know, one of the funny things, I wonder if you write in this way, Hank, but initially the novel, I knew sort of what the last set of scenes were going to be, kind of a sense of those beats, and just needed to sort of backtrack and think, well, how do we scale up here such that these final decisions make sense, or these final decision points make sense, and that we ratcheted the tension up as high as it's possibly going to go, so that you have that climactic moment. And so that sort of careful plotting back of this decision point, and then this decision point, and then this, all leading up to kind of that final.
Sherry says she's adding it to her TBR. You are wise.
Thank you, Sherry.
Absolutely. So when you finally got to write the end, when you got to write, not type the words the end, but when you got to write the end, you know, the climax and the coda, the emotional coda, what was that like for you?
That was one of the most joyful parts of it, honestly. It felt like a release when I knew that the rest of the book was solid on sturdy ground. It still requires some edits and everything, but was working. To get to that final point and to be able to sort of go into almost a cathartic moment with especially one of the characters, but with a couple, and to go into that cathartic moment and to release that, at least partially release some of that grief and that pain, felt amazing. It was also, like I said earlier, there are kinds of moments of poetry you want in a book, and some of them are a little bit quieter than others. And that final part of the book felt like one of those moments of poetry where I could just sort of indulge in that, and I could just give myself certain lines and certain phrases. And the rest of the novel, or a lot of the novel, is very disciplined in terms of how the sentences are structured. But you get to the final part of it, and all of a sudden it starts to loosen up a little bit in places.
And you're like, commas, I'm going to put those in.
Exactly.
I mean, it brings tears to your eyes at the end. It certainly does. And I can tell you that anyone who reads this book, and again, we're talking about Hush Harbor by Anise Vance, a debut novel that's just out that you must read. When anything that brings, I will never look at the world the same way after reading this book. It's absolutely haunting. And I wonder if you hoped for that.
Sorry, I'm getting emotional. The fact that you said that actually just makes me really emotional. That's kind of, that's one of the things, sorry. When you write a book like this that is dealing with sort of real world issues, and is dealing with things that are like so close and personal to your heart, there's not like a specific list of takeaways or policy actions or anything that I want people to take out of it. But I hoped that in giving people this experience, which was like, it's difficult to write about this stuff, man. It's difficult to wake up and for a couple of hours just be in a world that is about the killing of a Black teenager, and it does take its pound of flesh. And so you hope that what happens is when your readers read the book, they come away and say something like you just said, which is that they're not going to look at the world the same.
I mean, we will think after we read this, if we didn't think before, is this the domino? Is this the domino? Is this the domino that's going to fall? And why are there still these dominoes? Why is this still happening? I know I keep reading what other people say, but let me just read you from Michael Zapata to you all. because what people are saying about this book is not only about the book, but about what it means to them. And I think that's one of the powerful things about this book. Michael Zapata says, Anise Vance has revealed nothing less than the secret fears and tender solidarities that reside in our nation's troubled heart. Agile, electrifying, a singular reading experience. So that's right. That's right.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that quote, in that blurb and sort of on the back of the book when that came in it just like it hit me in the chest. Michael Zapata, he's wrote this phenomenal book, which is entitled The Lost Book of Adana Moreau. And in that, two characters have a conversation with each other about books. One of the characters says he doesn't know what makes a great book. He's particularly referring to science fiction books, but he says, I don't know what makes a great science fiction book. And the other character says something to the effect, or the difference between a good and a great one. The other character says something to the effect of, oh, it's about the possibility of transformation. If the book has the seed of the possibility of transformation. And so when Michael came back with that quote about Hush Harbor, it just meant the world to me because, I try to write towards that possibility of transformation, both for my characters and myself, and then also for readers who are devoting 8, 10, 12 hours, depending on how fast folks read, to just sitting there with the book in conversation with this fictional story. And so I write towards that. And so Michael, I don't know what to say. Like it just hit me in the chest.
Yeah, and I think if you read this, and I know you all will, you can't help but feel transformed and changed in a very heartbreaking and empowering kind of way. Again, you will never look at the world the same way, and that is a good thing. You all, I know you have questions for Anise, and I'd love to take some questions for you all. If you ask a question in the comments or leave a comment, you will be entered to win a copy of Hush Harbor. Renee, you are such a great question for right now. How are you celebrating your debut novel? Because this is a big deal, and we're all very thoughtful here and deep. But really, this is great. This is like champagne and party and be happy with people. Are you doing that?
So this past weekend, we had a bunch of family and friends in. Some of my best friends also came in, my cousins. And it was just like this beautiful moment where I felt it was almost like a wedding, right? Where you have all of these folks in a room that you never otherwise see in a room, and you feel this sense of love and community. And that just like meant the world to me to have that. And then, I've been doing this. I've just been, Hank, I'm such a nerd, man. Like I'll go to the bookstores and just like look at the book on the shelf and just like stand there for a few minutes. And then, we'll tell the bookseller that, oh, I wrote this book. Do you want me to sign some copies in case that helps with sales and all that kind of stuff? But part of it is just like standing there and telling my like 6-year-old self that, hey, this is a real thing that's happened now. And so that's kind of been my one of my ways of celebrating.
This is a real thing that's happening is a big deal.
Yeah.
We all of us look at the books in the bookstores. And it is quite amazing. There's nothing like seeing something you're watching in a bookstore and somebody goes to your book and you're like, pick it up. And then they pick it up and you're like, buy it. Then you see them look at the cover, you see them turn over to the back, you see them open. And then if you're so lucky, then you see them read, you open the first page and they read it and you think, buy it. So welcome to the world of being an author. And there was just a question that we had up, and I want to put that back up, Margaret, whatever that was, if you will. Are you going on book tour, Sherry?
I'm going on a couple of stops. I don't know if it'll extend beyond those stops, but I'll be in DC on September 19th at Solid State Books, which I'm super, super excited about. And then at the end of October, I'll be in Vancouver at the University of British Columbia, which I'm super excited about. And would love to really go anywhere and talk about the book and meet readers. And so if you have any interest in bringing me out, please, feel free to get in touch. My website has contact information. And I'm super super jazzed to to meet people in person.
Margaret, our producer Margaret, is putting all of that in the chat for all of you. I also know she told me before the show that Solid State Books is the coolest bookstore in the world, and so she was very impressed that they invited you. Apparently, that's just a wonderful store. So I lived in Washington D.C. for a couple of years. It wasn't there when I was there, so that's a new addition. Do we have time for one more question, Margaret? Why, Mighty Boy says, why do you think so many of the dystopian revolution stories we've had lately have been in YA packaging? Did you consider it that way as well?
So what's funny about that question is I actually had an author friend of mine maybe 6-7 years ago.
Come a little closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, for sure. I actually had an author friend of mine about 6 or 7 years ago suggest writing it in YA, and his reasoning was that YA was just such a large market. And I think so. Part of it, I think, is you see a lot of things in YA because it is just such a large market. But part of it is also when you're in that sort of young adult demographic, it seems a dystopian novel seems a little bit more palatable because it doesn't necessarily seem as real, right? So it's not as, I hate to use this word, but I think it's true. It's not as threatening. Whereas a dystopian novel in adult fiction tends to take on the tone of this could actually happen, right? Which is why Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel is just so haunting, because this dystopian novel about a pandemic, and you read it and you're just torn apart. And so this novel was really quite intentionally for the adult audience because I wanted it to feel very real, very gripping, very much like, very much like something that could really happen in the world.
I mean, there are no punches pulled in this book. I mean, it is a hit to the gut and a hit to the mind throughout. And we are talking about Hush Harbor by Anise Vance, this is just out last week to incredible acclaim. Do we have one last question? Margaret is urging us to take one last question. I cannot wait. Oh, Sharon, this is such a good question. What surprise did your main character bring to the book that you didn't plan on? If you can tell it without a spoiler.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say, first of all, my main character in the book, or the first character you meet at least, is based on my best friend in real life. So there weren't a ton of surprises. But one of the surprises that character did sort of reveal was, I think a lot of times we will really strongly suppress memories that are not pleasant for us, and then those will start to guide our actions. And I did not anticipate how strongly some of that character's repressed memories were really pushing him forward. And when he arrived at that was sort of also when I arrived at that, and I was like, oh my God, this is the core of this, of his decision making, and I really need to explore this. Now that the thing that happened to that character, I should note, did not happen to my best friend. They're two very distinct things. But other than that, much of the character is actually based on my best friend.
What did he say when he read it?
He loved it. He loved it. Thank God. I mean, I remember talking about this book, and and I had somebody come up to me afterwards and was like, but did your friend like it? Because if they didn't, that might be a little bit problematic. But fortunately, he loves the book, and was super supportive. And actually, the cover, the face on that cover is based off of him. His name is Chris. His name is Chris Herbie Holland. He's an actor. He was just in a play that was nominated for the Tony Award, Fat Ham.
What one?
Sorry?
What play?
Fat Ham.
Fat Ham. Yeah. I can't wait to see that. It's coming to Boston. I wonder if he'll be here for that. Yeah. That's good. That's great. And digression. You have been so marvelous today. Thank you for all your wonderful questions and your attention to Anise Vance and this wonderful book, Hush Harbor. We're now going to spin the wheel of fun. This is so great, and see who will win a copy of this novel. Look how cool this is. These are all the people over here. And this is showing that we are not picking up anyone. This is random selection. And the winner is Kathy Lang. Yeah. Kathy is a stalwart viewer of Crime Time, and we are thrilled to send this to you, you lucky woman. The rest of you, run in about 30 seconds. Run, and get your copy of Hush Harbor, and then email me and email Anise to tell us how you liked it. I guarantee you your life will be changed for the better in every way. Anise, congratulations on this.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Hank, for having me on. This was such a pleasure and such an honor.
Are you working on something else?
I am working on something else. Yes, just got notes back from my agent today, which is really exciting, really energizing.
Fantastic. Cannot wait to hear all about it. And you'll stay in touch.
Yes.
Happy book birthday, says Deborah Pruss. And that is a wonderful way of signing out for today. Remember, before I go, let me just really, really quickly tell you, I'm searching around for this. Next week at 4 p.m. ET, we will be talking to, look at that, Sarah Pekkanen. She is so fantastic. We'll also have Alan Eskins, Gone Tonight. I'm reading this book as soon as we get off this evening. I absolutely cannot wait. Meanwhile, today we've been talking about Hush Harbor by Anise Vance. So remember, until next time, it is always safe inside a book. And we will see you next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Love you.